Welcome back to the Crypto Clown World podcast. I am your host with the honks, Jason Bruce. It is the 23rd of March, 2024, and we're honking back in this Saturday with my co-host, Mr. Christopher Lundy. How you doing today, Chris?
I am rock solid, sir. How about yourself?
Good. Good to have you back.
Thank you. Good to be
All
back.
right. Yeah, definitely. So we're seeing quite a wild week, as we had discussed offline here, and with that in mind, we've seen some kind of sideways and a little bit of up after a dump down close to 60K for Bitcoin. But there's some larger things brewing that may or may not have potential to affect the market in ways that are going to yet be seen here. So, with that in mind, I'm going to let Chris jump into some geopolitical stuff before we get into too much crypto talk, because there seems to be some unrest over in Russia after what seems to be a pretty wild attack in a theater. A bunch of people were
Yes,
killed.
this happened overnight. Yeah. Details are still coming through, but these are not preliminary reports. This is very much after the fact now. So what we know currently is that the venue that was attacked was Crocus City Hall, and Crocus is spelled Crocus. This is what has been reported on OSINT groups, as well as major European and Russian media outlets as well. So what happened here is 4 assailants were found and stopped on their way out of the country, headed towards Ukraine. And there was a quote-unquote window, according to Vladimir Putin, that was opened, meaning a drop zone of some kind at the border or under the border. Hard to say. Not much is known about it at this time. This is simply what the Russian president is telling us. And there were 4 individuals, all of which were nationals of Tajikistan, which is in Central Asia, purportedly. This does not seem to be accurate, at least at present, because one of the assailants had a Ukrainian passport on him, which there's nothing wrong with having a Ukrainian passport in Russia. There's nothing unusual about that at all. So that by itself isn't going to elicit suspicion, even though they're at war with the country. So all of these men were detained, and they are currently under interrogation, these 4 men. Preliminary information from these interrogations has led to the FSB, which is the successor organization to the KGB in Russia. They busted up an ISIS cell, ISIS, in the Moscow region, and reportedly it was preparing to attack synagogues and then blame the attacks on Muslims inside Russia. So there were more attacks planned that have purportedly been thwarted. I expect that more will probably be coming in the not too distant future. Now, there was a national statement that was made to the Russian public by President Putin today, where he stated that the only hope for the terrorists is oblivion. And I found some parallels in the speech that were very similar to George W. Bush's post 9/11 speech, so that gave me a little bit of pause. So I hope that Mr. Putin is wiser than his American predecessor. In fact, his American predecessor was in power alongside him, only in a different country at the time. I hope that Mr. Putin does not jump the gun. But all these provocations towards Russia have a expiration date, essentially, and Putin has made no secret that there will be consequences. There will be retaliation. What that retaliation looks like has yet to be determined, but it's pretty clear to me, Jason, that there are efforts to poke Russia into responding in a way that is irreversible. And if you look at Western governments' behavior towards their own citizenry, I'm sure that Putin realizes that he's being led by the nose into a trap. So that's how I think he's processing this right now. Something else that was pretty big in European politics is that the Prime Minister of Ireland resigned this week. Prime Minister of Ireland up until this time, his name was Leo Varadkar, and Mr. Varadkar is a Irish national of Indian origin, and Mr. Varadkar, well, he had several scandals that were plaguing his administration. Most recently, up until the last several months, one of his ministers, Roderick O'Gorman, has been caught in a child welfare scandal where TUSLA, which is the Irish version of the CPS, was placing children in care homes, and they would go missing within days without a trace. And this was not just one or two, this was dozens upon dozens of children. So that's going on. And he also traveled to the United States, where he publicly called upon President Biden to stop the war in Gaza, stating that Ireland sympathizes with the Palestinians because it's a history of displacement and state terror directed towards them. And within 48 hours, he's issuing his resignation, so I found that to be very interesting timing. So that also happened this week. Interestingly, around the same time, the Greek Foreign Ministry prohibited and banned inviting representatives of Russia to celebrate Independence Day with them. And that came from Greece's foreign minister. His name is Georgios Garapatridis. And Georgios, as well as the Greek government, interestingly, is led by an Orthodox Christian coalition. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with the goings-on of the Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church and the Russian Orthodox Church are kind of on the skids at the moment because of what's going on in Ukraine. There's been an active attempts to separate the Greek and Russian sides of the church to distance themselves from each other. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with the Greek War of Independence's history, the Greek War of Independence was a conflict that happened during roughly the last century of the Ottoman Empire's existence. And Greece did not exist as a nation state at all for since the time of the Byzantine Empire, when all it had was a very small patch of land, which was Constantinople essentially, and a very small rump state called Trebizond, and it was taken over by the Ottomans in 1453, and the subsequent years afterward. Trebizond was all that was left. Well, interestingly, the British Empire decided to back some Greek rebels and even provided them with mercenaries for aid, and their navy, the British did, in an effort to bolster themselves against the Ottomans. Now, of course, the British Empire never wanted to have their imperial interests in the Levant disturbed, but they didn't have any imperial interests in the Levant because another empire had possession of it. And if they wanted to gain access to it, then the Roman Empire had to get out of the way. So I find it interesting that this is being done because Greece owes much of its independence to Russia, not just the British Empire. But because of the British Empire's backing, it's highly likely that they have some longer term deals behind the scenes and under the covers that we don't know about there. So if Greece ever gets, shall we say, an upstart that doesn't want to do the bidding of London, then that could be a game changer in the Levant, especially as it relates to the war that's taking place in Gaza. Now, moving on in terms of a few other things, there were significant layoffs, actually, at one of Israel's ports in Eilat. It's also pronounced Eliad, but I believe the correct pronunciation is Eilat. That's spelled Eilat. So revenues from this port have gone down by 80% since Yemeni combat operations began in the Red Sea. And as a result, mass layoffs have now taken place at that port. So this means that there's a significant economic crisis that's coming to Israel by way of blockade. And not only that, the Yemenis have expanded their theater of operations to include the Red Sea, which was the final maritime route to get to Israel that could be utilized. So any Israeli ships that traverse through the Indian Ocean will be targeted now. And I just and before today's podcast, I had to look at a map of every Yemeni drone strike or missile strike since 2014, and the extent of their strikes goes all the way from the northeastern tip of the Persian Gulf to southern Israel. They can cover the entire Middle East with their strike range. So even though Yemen is a relatively poor country, they're one of 5 countries in the world that have access to hypersonic missiles. The US has 0. The UK has 0, which means that the force multiplier advantage is towards Yemen right now, which is why they've been able to hold up for almost, 3-4 months against, continuous attacks back and forth between them and Western navies. So that's happening, and a very bizarre comment was made this week by Jared Kushner, who's Donald Trump's son-in-law. He stated, and I quote, Gaza's waterfront properties could be very valuable and, quote, Israel should bulldoze an area of the Negev desert and move Palestinians there, close quote. This is Jared Kushner. So Mr. Kushner is openly advocating for ethnic cleansing. And this is a serious thing because Mr. Kushner is in the United States. He's a U.S. citizen. He's also an Israeli citizen. And making these types of public statements, especially coming from somebody that's going to be part of a future presidential administration, is going to create significant problems for a future Trump administration in terms of legal issues, complicity, things of this nature. And I expect that the American establishment is going to do one of 2 things in relation to this. Either they're going to walk it back, or they're just going to pretend like it didn't happen. And when the goal is achieved, nothing will take place there. But these statements continue to come out consistently, and it's going to further stain America's image internationally when these types of statements are allowed to be released to the press for the United States, especially. And this continues to happen. So expect these types of statements to continue, just casually talking about genocide. Mr. Kushner also said that Israel should, quote, clean up the strip, close quote. What does clean up mean? I'll leave it to the listener. And something else, Al Arabiya reported this past week that the FBI is fearing that Iran will organize attacks and assassinations of its opponents on American soil. Well, I'm sure that the FBI has had this concern for a while, especially considering that Hezbollah has had a presence in the United States since at least 2009. So it's not like they didn't know about this, but they allowed that presence to build up, which, we all know what shenanigans the FBI has been involved in over the years. Moving on, we've got some really interesting news coming out of excuse me, the crypto markets. Actually, now the crypto markets right now, I'm noticing, Jason, that meme coins are really kind of on a tear right now. Are you seeing that? Is this like an entire segment of meme coins in the market, or is it just meme coins on specific platforms in order? What are you seeing?
I think there is probably a sign that we're seeing where, retail is starting to come in, and a lot of the retail, I think, is a little more driven by stuff where they think they can, pull the lever on a slot machine and win $1 million. So,
well, my thoughts are this. Well, Dogecoin, as I recall from 2021, was the first meme coin to really go nuts. And as I recall, Exodus Wallet had to put up a warning on their swaps for Dogecoin because their swap pool was getting overwhelmed inside of their app, as I recall. This was like 3 years back. So um, there seems to be an order to this. I also saw that I believe it was Avalanche, AVAX, is having a meme coin event sometime next week. And I don't know exactly what it is, but there looks to be some new meme coins launching around that point on some fresh exchanges. I don't know which ones. Probably the usual suspects like MEXC. So um, I have seen some large pumps of ridiculously named projects, but my take on this is that it's just a way to kind of say, hey, the bull market's on again. Retail, come on back in and make money if you have the smarts to take your profits, essentially. So that's what I'm seeing there, and something I wanted to mention earlier that I neglected to mention about the Moscow attacks that took place over the last 24 hours. Well, two things happened over the course of the last 6 months or so since this catastrophe has unfolded in the Levant. One was an Israeli politician that went on Russia Today on their live news program. And since Russia's president did not formally condemn Hamas, he stated that, among other reasons purportedly, that Russia would pay the price. I do not know the name of this Likud minister, but it went viral, and I should have gotten the name before the broadcast. But that happened, and Victoria Nuland, the former assistant deputy secretary of state or whatever, who's no longer in the Biden administration, stated that Putin will get some very nice surprises, and made this statement rather giddily. I don't remember if it was made in Ukraine or in America, but those types of statements lead me to believe that Russia knows that there's American involvement, at least, if not directly, indirectly. And I'm very concerned. I'm concerned that there's going to be a kinetic response at some point. I mean, if Russian troops were to enter the United States and do something like that here in central DC, we would be invading Russia within a heartbeat. So their, shall we say, restraint is remarkable in this context. So I have to be very thankful towards our Russian counterparts for not, taking the establishment's bait in this context. But there's also something else happening in the crypto markets I want to speak to. Is that we've got some interesting patterns working into the markets as a result of these ETFs. So, like on the first dump of ETFs, there were $1.6 billion worth of outflows for these Bitcoin ETFs. The Bitcoin network got $1.1 billion of inflows at that exact same time. So basically, self-custody investors are buying the dip. ETF investors are, selling at a loss as soon as the price goes down. So just like with every listing event, it's a sell the news event, and I don't think this is bad for the investors long term. I think that this is a normal market, event. Whenever you're going into traditional finance, if you don't hold it, you don't own it, and most of the profits aren't going to be yours. They're going to be that of the custodian. So ETF investors, take note. Self-custody is the way to go. You could have gotten net inflows instead of net outflows if you were smart. And there's also what appears to be a bit of a tug of war between the United States and Israel over Rafah. There's an impending assault on Rafah coming up. Now, for those of you that aren't aware of what Rafah means from a geopolitical context, in 1979, there was a peace agreement that was signed between Egypt and Israel that ended a war between the two countries called the Camp David Accords. And it was signed in 1979.
I recall. I remember that, yeah.
During this time, Israel invaded Egypt all the way up to the Nile River and the Suez Canal and took over the entire Sinai Peninsula. And Egypt was prepared to basically carpet bomb Israel into the Stone Age if they moved if they did not immediately retreat back beyond that border. And lots of words were spared, and Jimmy Carter, along with his national security team, came down and brokered a deal. And in that deal, Rafah is a no-go zone for Israel. So what this means is that if the Israelis attack Rafah, the Camp David Accords are going to most likely get torn up by Egypt, and Egypt and Israel will be at a de facto state of war again the moment that that happens. And Israel knows this, and since they're trying to expand the conflict, this will give them an inroad to extend their their sortie campaigns that they're currently running over Damascus or running over Beirut or running, that they're going to extend them to Cairo. And we've heard many statements publicly from them over the course of the last 6 months saying that nowhere in the we can hit any target in the Middle East. So they're, at least in my opinion, based upon Israeli leaders' own statements, they seem to want to escalate and expand the conflict. I don't think it's in their interest to expand the conflict towards Egypt because Egypt's military capabilities dwarf that of Israel by a long shot. So not only that, Russia is investing in Egyptian nuclear infrastructure, and I think that they're doing this for a very good reason. They probably, in my opinion, want a counterweight in the region to what's happening in Gaza so that it does not recur. I don't think that's the only step, but Egypt is also a very poor country economically. 50% of the population lives below the poverty line, and they have essentially a Western client state there. The Muslim Brotherhood governments that took power after the so-called Arab Spring, many of the leaders have been executed by Egypt since then, and there may be some change in the air if Rafah is attacked, because the Egyptian population considers the Egyptian establishment to be a treasonous government. The Jordanian population largely feels the same, as it relates to their relationships with the Israeli state. So there will be some very historic things happening, not good for Israel or the United States or Egypt or anywhere else in the world if Israel attacks Rafah. And there was one statement that was made today. I believe it was today. I could be wrong. But that statement was made, I believe, by either a deputy foreign minister or someone else. Oh, yeah, the Minister of Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer. Israel's Minister of Strategic Affairs stated this today. And he stated, quote, Israel will carry out the operation in Rafah, even if it leads to a rupture in relations with the U.S., close quote. And that was what Mr. Dermer had to say today. So Israel has made it abundantly clear that they don't care what we think. They're going to do it anyway. So based upon the statement, Israel could care less if it loses U.S. support. I think that these statements are mostly hot air, especially considering that most of Israel's weaponry and money comes from the United States. I think it's highly unlikely that they are openly looking to rupture relations. But what people say and what they do are two different things oftentimes. So, as for something else I've been noticing, and that I was looking at, is that I was looking at the others BTC USD chart, and we've got. It looks like we're very close to the end of the consolidation phase with this particular chart, and it's looking like it's ready to rock. So I'm definitely having a look at my altcoin portfolio and just doing the best I can to try to find something that hasn't moved too much. But there's definitely opportunities in the markets, guys. But regardless of the opportunities in the markets, I think it's also important, especially now, to make sure that you have good internal strength and to focus on your your personal health, your personal well-being, and to kind of disconnect from anything that you feel is giving you fear, because that's how you make bad decisions. And um, if we've learned anything from our domestic experiences here in the West, just collectively, is that, that seems to be the preferred method of ruling, is to rule by fear. And I prefer not to do that. I prefer to live in a different way. And I think when we step out of that space, things will start to improve for everyone. And those are all my talking points, sir. I think I got it covered pretty well. Tops off nicely.
Sorry, I was stuck on mute there, my friend. So yeah, that, as always, is quite enlightening, and there's obviously going to be a pretty fluid situation going on there. So we'll have to see how that affects our charts, right? So
yeah. Now, there's something else that I covered last week that I'm just going to top off briefly right now, is that U.S. banks aren't well capitalized, guys.
Oh yeah,
The Fed is
it's bad.
The Fed is telling them to go out and fundraise. They're saying, no, we're cutting you off. You don't get to live high on the hog anymore. And if what Tom Luongo is saying is correct, the Fed's trying to deep six the offshore dollar markets so that Janet Yellen and all of her globalist crazy friends don't succeed in essentially hyperinflating the U.S. dollar into nothing. Well, his argument is that hyperinflation is a choice. It's not some sort of like economic inevitability. And he's a smart guy, so I'm inclined to take what he has to say seriously. So.
Very interesting. Yeah, I was listening to some stuff briefly, and they're kind of talking about how there's likely an imminent, second round of banking collapses coming, and we're coming up on a year since the last one, right? It's a pretty quick year that went by since the last round of bank collapses, but it's possible that we might see another one, right?
Guys.
Yeah.
Silicon Valley Bank was a year ago.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm surprised we didn't have more banking failures then, but it's pretty clear that the higher for longer stance is done right this time, because the last time higher for longer was done was in the early 1980s under the Volcker Fed, and rates skyrocketed to double digits, and a major recession hit almost immediately. Now we've got higher for longer, but higher and staying higher and not going any higher. So there seems to be a different approach this time around to higher for longer, because what we're coming out of economically is more or less equivalent to the massive expansion in price of what happened in the gold markets in the 1970s. Only this time, instead of a shift out of, shall we say, risk assets, it's a shift into risk assets, because the money system itself is collapsing. So we're not going to know which way is up when this goose is cooked, I guess. But I guess we'll find out one way or another.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would tend to think at this point that our chicken is fried, and it's optimistic to think that it's a choice at this point, and that the choice pretty much hasn't been made. I'm not sure what actions could be taken at this point outside of just completely abolishing the Federal Reserve and a full flush out of the financial system, which obviously is going to cause a lot of people a lot of pain. A lot of people that I might not necessarily care if they have an uncomfortable time, but when it comes down to it, the general population will be affected by that as well, because there's going to be a huge transition one way or another, whether we transition into some sort of more totalitarian sort of a economic system, or if we're able to pull ourselves out of that in some way or another over the next 5 to 6 years here, as all this stuff starts to come to a head, more than likely in 2030. So with that said, I think we can jump over to some charts here. Let me get my display up for everyone. If you can see on your end, Chris. The audience should be able to see everything there.
I can see it just fine.
All right, awesome.
I'll
So,
maintain silence while you do your TA, and I'll jump in after.
yeah, I mean,
Spot.
what are we looking at here? We're looking at chop, right? It's just chop, chop, chop. So, I've chopped up all these zones, and there's a lot of levels that we can look at between, 60 and 70K. And I I outlined some things in the Discord early in the week, and I was like, look, in terms of where we closed and in terms of where the levels are at and the support and resistance, above 70K we're bullish, and between 60 and 70 we're sideways, and below 60 we might see some more pain. So where are we at right now? We're sitting at 65K. We're literally in the middle of that range. So what is this? It's a chop zone. So you have to be a little bit careful about what you're doing right now. And I had some successful trades this morning, and I'm kind of taking a strategy right now where my profits are being split 3 ways. I may even split them 4 ways, or start to do a few different things too. But right now I'm just putting profit in Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Tether. So all three. So I made some good gains this morning and put some profit into all three of those that I'm sitting on. But right now I'm in a trade that I'm a little bit underwater on, so I'm kind of monitoring that, and we'll see how that goes as the show progresses and as the day and the weekend progresses. But with all that being said, here with this chop zone, you have to be careful. If you're trading on the weekends, you can get chopped up pretty easily. So keep that in mind. So what we're seeing again on the 1 hour, we peaked out on that rising wedge, right? So that peaked out and then pretty much came down and formed a double bottom, and that double bottom actually gave us some divergence to play off of. So there was a little bit of hidden bullish that came in there, and that gave us the last move up, where it kind of looked like a breakout, and maybe we're seeing a little bit of retest, but the retest right now is low volume and it's kind of moving sideways, and I'm not 100% confident in the volume that we're seeing. So we'll have to see how much follow through we actually get on this right now. When we take a little more of a look at the macro, if we swing out to like the weekly, this has some questionable tones to it, right? So, we're coming back down and kind of retesting zone around 60K here, and the price itself is kind of sitting right around the level of the previous all-time high close on the weekly, which was sitting around like, what is it, 66? Excuse me. Why is it not showing? Okay, that's a selling candle. There we go. So 65, 66, somewhere in that area. Sorry, folks. So, when we're looking at this level, this is a critical level, right? Because was this breakout and retest of this all-time high level? Is that what we're seeing here? Is, wick down and now we're having retest? Or do we need more of a retest? Do we have to come back down and retest the 21 MA on the weekly? Maybe even retest the 200 daily or the 200 weekly, where we have a little bit more volume and a little bit more of a supply zone, a little bit more confluence. There's a lot more volume in that 40 to 50 range than there is at the current level, but we'll have to kind of see how that goes. So with that said, we're at an area where we're potentially extended. So we have to make sure that we're maintaining what the smaller time frames are doing. So if you're not watching the hourly, 4 hour, and even the 15-minute right now, you're not going to get a full picture of what's going on, because it can kind of sneak up on you and take you by surprise if you're not watching those smaller time frames. So monitor the smaller time frames along with us through the weekend, and we'll see what happens. I'm going to jump over to Ethereum. On the 4 hour, we saw kind of a similar move to what Bitcoin did, but the retracement was a little deeper. It retraced, past that kind of previous swing wick low that we had, and that didn't create the same divergence for Ethereum. So if we're looking at like a hidden bullish, Probably looking at something a little more like that, from that area, or even back from here. So that's not a bad hidden bullish to look at there. And essentially what we had was like falling broadening wedge, and looks like a pretty nice breakout and retest there. Or really just kind of a falling parallel channel. So it looks like breakout and retest of that channel, right? So we'll have to monitor that. And if we saw like a W pattern breakout, you would see ETH make a pretty nice move. I will say though, when I've been seeing W's set up, that we haven't really been seeing a lot of follow through on them. So we'll have to see if that actually plays out here. If it did, we would make a new local high for ETH just north of 4100, around like 4167 area. So that'd be pretty interesting if we saw that happen. More than likely we'd see an uptrend resume if we saw a move like that. Further retracement. We're talking about, point of control here just below 3,000 at around 2923. And there's a little bit of support below that around 2800, just above that at like 2816, 2815 area. If that doesn't hold, you're going a lot deeper. You could volume gap down to the 200 daily around 2300 area. So your hope for Ethereum here is that you hold these levels. Same for BTC, right? So as we continue to monitor that stuff, we can take a look at the ETH. Thought I had the BTC pair. That's what we wanted. Take a look at the BTC pair as well. And if we look at the retracement on the 4 hour here, we actually have more than a full retrace from the previous move. So in terms of where this is going here, we'll have to see if it's got support, around this spider line, or where this pair is going after a rejection at the 200 daily and the 200 weekly. I was hoping to see a better move, a little more follow through there after some hidden bullish divergence and some bullish divergence, but came up to a point of control and got rejected, and now that pair is consolidating there. So we'll continue to monitor that sideways movement. If we take a look at the USDT dominance, smaller time frame, looks like it might be ready to move a little bit. Yeah, 1 hour looks like it might be ready to take a little bit of a move up as well. So I have to keep an eye on that. It's kind of an odd, chunky sort of a triangle. That's a little bit 50-50 there on the tether dominance. That could go either way. You could come back down and test the previous low of this range, or you could make the next move up and probably close to the 200 weekly moving average, just above like 5% tether dominance. So if we saw that, obviously we'd see a sell-off over the weekend here. It looks like there's a little bit of a move coming with that right now. I may cut my trade short here if that gets a little more aggressive. Moving over to the total 3. Seeing some similar things once again with like, bit of a parallel channel. Maybe you could even call it a little bit of a falling wedge with the total 3. And we saw like breakout and retest, and now potentially forming like a bit of an inverse head and shoulders here as that consolidation moves on. So that actually looks pretty positive to me for altcoins, as long as you hold up this shoulder. If you're breaking back down, creating a new low in relation to this head and break back into the pattern, then you're going to have to come back down here and at very least double bottom, in this area around 650 billion for the total 3 market cap. So watch your altcoins right now, folks. Watch your altcoins, as we may even be starting to see a little bit of a sell-off ensue right now. I am monitoring a trade on the side here, so bear with me if there's a little bit of a pause there. Taking a look at BNB, third largest crypto by market cap. Again, we're moving sideways. Bit of like a low volume breakout out of a falling wedge, and we did have a pump up to just below the golden pocket, kind of at a point of control there, rejected and consolidating. So just twisting sideways along with the rest of the market for BNB. We did mention meme coins a little bit at the top of the show. Dogecoin. This is a secret time frame, by the way. This is a 288-minute time frame. I'm not going to get into the whole idea behind that, but you can try to do a little bit of math behind that yourself and see if you can figure it out. With this pattern, to me, it's not the most bullish. It looks like a descending triangle. So if this were to break down, Doge might retest the 200 daily. That would be like around 8.5 cents, just above 8.5 cents. So there may be some retracement coming into the market here. We'll have to continue to monitor this, but to me this isn't the most bullish flag, but Doge breaks out of these sometimes as well. And I was looking at this earlier, and it kind of looked like we were going to get follow through on this inverse head and shoulders. So are we retesting that right now, or is this like a fake out type of a pattern? It looks like breakout and retest on the RSI. It looks pretty solid, so we'll have to continue to monitor that for Doge on the secret 288-minute time frame. So I'm going to jump into a few altcoins that I've been looking at. We did call orange in the Discord, and we were able to accumulate in this range. It did pump up and come back down. Unfortunately, I didn't scalp this off. Would have been nice to reaccumulate on that. So I did call this again in this area and say, hey, if you're not in orange, you can go ahead and jump in. This is an acceptable range. And this kind of moved sideways, and this had a little more bullish price action than the rest of the market here, as it broke out of that falling wedge and made a new high. So it's kind of negotiating some of the areas that I had set out between about 72 and 76 cents right now. So if you took the trade on orange, you should be up close to 100%. And this is a coin that I believe will continue to go up. It's actually built on Bitcoin. I believe it's a staking type of a thing. You'll have to look into a little bit more of the fundamentals on the side if you're curious, but it is a BRC20 token, and I do believe this will continue to pump as we continue to progress in this market. And got a few others here that came to my attention this morning. One is Arrow. All right. This is a little bit of an oddball pattern. You would say normally, rising wedge. But with all that said, there is potential for this to break out parabolically. I like this chart looks a little bit different than it did for me earlier. I don't know why that's so aggressive. That's funny. take that out to the log. There we go. That's what I was looking at earlier. You know, you could see a little bit of a larger move for this coin. So this is going to be like a swap for Coinbase, I believe, or like a staking for Coinbase. Again, look into the fundamentals on the side, but this is Coinbase Ventures type of a thing, and this has potential to do big numbers. And you know, it's new, can jump into price discovery, and you know, really one of the larger players on the scene, and you know, custodying BlackRock's ETF. More than likely Coinbase is going to be doing really big things. So this coin is definitely something you should have on your radar. And I believe there's one called Velodrome as well that's like paired with it. And again, you'll have to look into the fundamentals on this stuff for yourself, but I would recommend to start chipping away at an allocation on these two coins, because they could do really big numbers. So you're going to get some short-term retracement on these, but ultimately, you know, I think 3 to 5x midterm on these is very realistic. And then as we get into the bull run, you could see, you know, another 3 to 5x, if not more. So I think 20, maybe even 30x in the peak of the bull run for these is very realistic, and it's an easy play for most people, as they can just inject fiat into Coinbase, and these will potentially do some numbers for them. But again, be a little bit careful with your entries right now. These are a little bit pumped up, so you may be able to get, you know, a better spot, a better area to enter. You know, if this thing were to break down a little bit better, you might be able to enter around like 6.5 cents. So just be careful, watch your smaller time frames with these. As always, nothing that I'm saying here should be construed as financial advice. These are highly speculative assets. Get yourself a financial advisor. Do your own due diligence and research before jumping into any coin, project, investment, or trade. Just real quickly, gonna check the Discord here. And we did not get any requests for coins today, folks. Are people actually out touching grass? It's cold out. Come on. You should be home hanging out with us on the podcast. We don't even have anybody hanging out with me and Chris today. We had Ryan with us last week. So just me and Chris this week, folks. Just me and Chris. What do you got, Chris? Go ahead.
Iron, I-R-O-N. It's a new coin on Trade Ogre. It's a privacy coin called Ironfish. And
we got that on MEXC as well, Chris. It's on MEXC as well.
Yeah, they just listed on MEXC as well. Good call on that. It is in a retrace mode, so this is ripe for entry. Really want.
This looks like a good entry. It does look like a good entry on the 4 hour, and you take a look here. You know, potentially you're brewing up something like this.
There's that big gap in the Bollinger Band below current price levels, though, that has me really nervous. So I think I'm going to set some buy orders below there. Because on these low cap coins, you can get scalps pretty easy if you're patient.
Yeah, that head and shoulders could get you started to the upside, though.
It could. You know, I'm just saying that it never hurts to have one tiny FL low ball buy order on these low.
No, I totally agree. You know, look for your.
You don't want to not do that.
Yep. Look for your golden pocket. Look for your 786. Look for your 886, or you know, even you know, look for a further breakdown like a 1.618. Sometimes you'll see something like that, a 1.618 retrace. So look for those levels. You know, if you're looking to fish a little bit, and you might come up with something if we see, you know, some events come down the line that, you know, may potentially be influenced by some of the stuff that we talked about at the top of the show. But, you know, when I look at this, got a really young chart here, right? But this looks like a cup and handle on the 4 hour. So this thing could get into price discovery and be pretty solid. You know, you could be up at $5 or $6 before you know it and easily double your money. So new privacy coin on MEXC. Good call, Chris. All right. So, yeah, one other thing that we were kind of talking about, I think you were talking about that others slash Bitcoin USD. I wasn't able to find a chart on that on TradingView, but I was able to find this others, which essentially excludes the top 10. So it looks like there's potentially some action there, that could really push the altcoins up. There's some hidden bullish divergence on the daily, which, people were looking for a larger dump, and it seems like the market came down and created that divergence that we were looking for on the daily. The only thing that we're looking for here is to start closing candles above the 21 MA on the daily. So like if we zoom in a little bit, we can see that there's kind of a head and shoulders potentially starting to form there, as we're starting to get a retest on some of the lower time frames of the 21 MAs there. So, if we can hold this structure, the altcoins will have a better possibility to make a move, and you might even be seeing something where you're seeing like even a little bit of a fractal happening here. If we're potentially seeing something like that, maybe we're now even starting to see the breakout and retest on that. So fractals are always good. Keep an eye out for fractals. Those can lead to larger moves in your trading.
This looks like a pattern within a pattern. It looks like 3 inverse head and shoulders moves in one.
Yeah, look at that.
It looks pretty explosive.
Yep, look at that. So again, fractals, folks. Fractals, pattern recognition. Look for this stuff, and it's not guaranteed to play out, but when you see something like this, you have about a 2 out of 3 probability at least to see this volume gap up to this area around like 350 billion for everything excluding the top 10. So I'm sure that would benefit a lot of people holding altcoins out there if you were to see a move like that. So
this is a textbook end of consolidation pattern fractal. Like, it doesn't get much more obvious than this.
Yeah, just some some tips and tricks. This is basic stuff that people can look for. Patterns within patterns are always a clue that you may be seeing a larger move, or some type of a trending, type of a consolidation. So interesting stuff there. Any parting shots or words, Chris?
I noticed the RSI did a deep dive and the price is barely moving, which is a good sign. That means that we've got plenty more buying left to go.
Yeah, that's something that's always positive. When you're seeing consolidation, your stochastics reset, and you got support there, that typically will give you a little bit of room to try and move back up. So we'll, as always, continue to monitor that stuff. I want to thank you, as usual, for jumping on, Chris. It's always a pleasure, man. And to our listeners, if you made it this far, please make sure you're honking the like button on the way out. We do appreciate that. If you're not subscribed to the channel, I'm not sure why you wouldn't be, but please make sure that you are. And if you haven't, double check, make sure that you're hitting the bell for notifications as well, because that way you'll be notified on time when we get the podcast uploads out, along with any technical analysis that may be uploaded to the YouTube channel. Most of the updates I've been sending out exclusively through the Discord or Telegram. You can message me on Twitter at CryptoClownWorld if you want to get access to those. I do vet people personally. I don't put those links out there just for people to access. I need to have a better idea of who people are before I bring them into my circle. I don't ask for people to pay me for access to that. I just ask that they not be of questionable character. So with that in mind, I'm your host with the honks, Jason Bruce. This has been the Crypto Clown World podcast, our 3rd episode. And thanks again to Mr. Christopher Lundy. And to anyone who may have been listening, make sure you have yourselves a fantastic weekend. Much love. God bless. And we'll talk to you soon.